So, very warm welcome to everyone who's joining our webinar this afternoon. It's going to be, which I say this on everyone, but this one I'm really looking forward to because today we've got Lincoln Marley. I'm not going to intro Lincoln because we've also got John Foster Pedley, the Dean of Henley Business School, gracing us with his presence. And that truly is a remarkable thing because if you've seen his diary like I have, he is hardly ever available. To get an hour of his time to actually participate on this is absolutely incredible. Before I hand over to John, I just want to say to everyone, let's make this participative. One of the reasons I love doing these webinars live is so that we can get your questions. Then it doesn't become the Colin just ask the questions he wants to show. I've got lots lined up, but I really do hope that you guys take over as quickly as possible to go and get the insights that hopefully Lincoln will provide. It is fantastic having access to business leaders like this. It really is absolutely superb. So with that, John, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Colin. And it's wonderful to be here. Just make a very brief introduction. I'm going to talk very briefly about Henley and very little bit about Lincoln, because I think you can add even more detail than I can. Lincoln is a person that I deeply respect and very, very pleased to have been working on youth development and leadership development with you, Lincoln. It's been an absolute pleasure to do that. And every time you come on campus and we talk, I think, oh, I wish I could spend more time with you. So at least I get a chance today. And you did a very good talk with our Chancellor of the University of Reading, of which Henley's part, Paul Linley. And I think you two guys got on really well. And I know Paul wants to have more contact with you with this play he's doing. And he's a very famous entrepreneur in the UK. And so for those of you who don't know Lincoln has done so much work in banking, financial services, really focuses on leadership, customer services, digital transformation, etc. And he's a genuine corporate leader who has also, I think, transformed yourself in many ways into an inspirational leader around youth and development, because you've got a really interesting backstory. You've come from challenges that most people would never overcome, but you have overcome them. And you're now inspiring and smiling and leading people, writing books and teaching all of us a bit about how to really get energized to lead. Before I hand over, I'm just going to, Brent, it sounds very low there from somebody. You can change that, Colin. Henley Business School, I'll tell you very briefly about. It's an 80-year-old business school founded in the UK. We're global. We're part of a University of Reading, which is a 100-year-old university in the UK. That Reading operates around the world. And Henley Business School is a quadruple accredited global business school. We operate in China, Malaysia, India. I've just come back from a visit to India, Middle East, Europe, the Nordics, and a very big operation here doing MBAs and executive education, where we've had been very fortunate to gain a formidable reputation for customer care and looking after our students and making them successful. And our motto is what you see behind me. We build a people who build the businesses that build Africa. And that really drives everything we do. And so I'm going to shut up now and let you listen to the real people who are going to talk today. Back to you, Colin. Thank you very much for being here, everybody. And I really hope you enjoy this talk.
Thank you very much, John. Lincoln, welcome. Hello.
And yeah, again, a huge thank you to Henley. We've been great partners. Proud to have been through the Henley MBA. And yeah, it's great to have this conversation. And you and I have been on different platforms together. And it's great now to share this one.
Now, what I'm wanting to get at today, I mean, we've called it sort of leadership outside of the textbook, but, you know, I've known you for a while. I've followed you for a while. I've talked to a lot of people that you know that have had an influence on your life. It's disgusting how every single person says only positive things. I have much to learn, and I guess that's what I want from this session. You've achieved so much, and I really want to try to get insight over the next 50 minutes about how you've actually done that. Was it deliberate? Was it luck? Was it networks? So you kind of bought into it? What was it that drove you? What is it that you've tried to go and do? And use some of those stories, but real stories from your background to actually showcase just how it is possible to achieve, no matter what your background, no matter where you are actually in the world. But before we can get started into that, we have to probably start where you are. What are you actually doing now? What is your role? For anyone that isn't following you like I have been, You're the Group CEO of Lesaka. Tell us a little bit about Lesaka.
Thanks so much, Colin. So Lesaka is a fintech that's focused on the payments environment that offers digital payments, offers systems as a service, and is involved in consumers, micro merchants, merchants, and large enterprises. I've been here now close to 4 years. Joined an organization that was in trouble financially, was in trouble reputationally, wasn't growing, was involved in a lot of controversies. And we were asked to build a team. My colleague at the time, Chris Meyer, and myself started this journey, and everybody thought, what were we thinking? I'd been at Standard Bank for 20 years. Chris had been at Investec for 20 years. He's from East London. I'm from Port Elizabeth in South Africa. And we're both passionate about change. And we got this opportunity to rebuild this organization 4 years on with a rebranding and some acquisitions. We're now the largest fintech in Southern Africa. So it's been a remarkable story, very difficult 4 years, but it's been very, very, very fulfilling.
Now, why on earth would you do that? Because, I mean, maybe this is the first leadership lesson. Because when I heard that you were moving from Standard Bank in such a privileged role where you had access to SIM and the rest of the Exco, you were doing some big roles over there, leading product divisions, leading whole countries, and having such success. What on earth were you doing thinking about accepting an offer to go over to what was then called Net One? And it was obviously in the mire in terms of its reputation because of many of the issues that it had failed in terms of delivery to the post office and other issues as well. I mean, it's just a crazy thing to do. You're doing really well, and you go over to this kind of entity that in all likelihood is going to disappear and go bust.
Yeah, Standard Bank was amazing for me. I'd spent amazing 20 years, given so many responsibilities, learned a lot from amazing leaders like Jaco Maree, Peter Wharton-Hood, Peter Slebush, Zweli Manyati, Sim Chabalala, and others.
It's name dropping now,
But
Lincoln is cool.
but I had an opportunity during COVID to reflect a lot on where I'd like to be in the future. And in those 20 years, I'd never had gone to have coffee with anybody. My blood was blue, so I wasn't going anywhere. But I had this call from this crazy fellow called Ali Mazandarani, who's a serial entrepreneur who built multi-billion-dollar businesses and payments. And he sold me a dream. And the biggest thing about that dream was financial inclusion and digital payments. And I think it got me at hello. And I was able to see a future that he was painting, which is about including more small entrepreneurs and more low-income customers into the payment system. And so that's how I joined Lesaka. And we did all of those things. And then a year ago, that same Ali Mazandarani now came back to join when Chris left, and he now is our executive chair. So the dream that he sold me is now back to try and work for us to get to that dream.
Was this also partly because you felt you had unfinished business? Because I know you tried to go and develop the distribution and adequate banking models into the informal sector, and I think, like most banks at that time and still today, to be honest, it failed miserably.
Yeah, it is one of the failure points in my career that I couldn't persuade Standard Bank at the time that the future of this country lies in financial inclusion. That if we don't include large numbers of poor people, low-income people, small businesses in the economy, we will not be doing justice. And I remember being so angry when I couldn't get that message through that in my MBA class, I wrote my thesis on this. And some of the things I wrote about, I could now see adopted by an organization that was small at the time with a name starting with a C, followed by an A, followed by a P. And that organization has now been rewarded with 23 million customers. So the point was, it is possible to run a viable business in the low income part of society and run a viable business that gives value to customers and still make sure that that business itself is able to grow. And I think that business has been able to show that.
Okay, so here we are, 2025. You're having incredible success. Hardly see it as a failure when you're unable to convince a large organization like a standard bank, like any organization, trying to get momentum to do new things is always very tricky. And 99 times out of 100, you're not going to succeed in that space. That's a conversation for anyone that's interested in corporate innovation and disruption. But your starting point in life in those early and formative years, at the late school, going into university, reading your book, you could have ended up on a very different walk of life. You could have ended up either dead or certainly not getting up into these, huge, influential corporate roles. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that and explain what it was that you think guided you back into, doing so well on the business and some of the lessons that you learned through that experience?
Yeah, in the late 80s, growing up in our townships, we as young people were very angry. We wanted to bring the apartheid system down. We wanted to make the country ungovernable. And so we were in school boycotts. I'd not been studying for 2.5 years. I was in and out of jail. I'd been expelled from school, was trying to leave the country. I was part of a group of very angry young people. And so at one point, we were running around from the police and hiding in different places. And this one time, we were hiding in a church where obviously the police wouldn't go and look for us. And my father found me there. And he had this conversation with me that made a profound impact on my life when he asked us, when are we going back to school? And I had, my script, which is our leaders are still in jail, our demands have not been met, we still have police brutality. And he said, but it's still important for you to go to school. And they're like, no, what about school? We want guns, He said, no, but one day I want you to go to Harvard. Where's that? We want stones, we want guns. And my father said, it's not the size of the stone you can throw against the army. It's not the potency of the petrol bomb you can throw against the police. It's the quality of education that you get. It's the values that you imbibe. It's the principles that you uphold. And it's also living in the way of the future you want to create. I thought I could win that argument, but it was clear that this man had defeated me and made me to see a very different light. We started having conversations about going back to school. We were able to go back to school, and I was able to go to a different school and finish my matric. And Mrs. Morpa, who welcomed us in Newell High when no school would take us, gave me a chance in my life. And she's still a mentor and a supporter in everything I do. So both my father's vision of seeing through the difficulty and seeing way beyond the current difficulties and darkness was a big thing for me. Secondly, Mrs. Morpa, who saw potential in us that we didn't see ourselves. So I stand or sit here as a beneficiary of other people's vision and other people's benevolence. And really, really, I'm very grateful for those people.
You think that those principles still apply today? 20, well, more than 20 years. Geez, time flies, doesn't it? But all these years later, when we look at what's happened, what hasn't happened, and we're disappointed about much stuff, do you still think the best education, embracing the values and principles and ethics is, in general, what should bring, give people the advantage to get ahead in their career? We see so many people with a different approach.
Absolutely. I think that the foundations you get at home with your family, in your church environment, in your community, with your relatives, sports bodies, all of those people can really, really help young people to have a perspective with all the difficulties that they face. And that's why I'm very passionate about working with young people, because I know I couldn't see beyond the anger that we had at the time. Secondly, I think that education plays a very important role. So being able to get back to school and get to university has enabled me to kind of maneuver and work through life and all the difficulties. Thirdly, also the sense of resilience, because, if you've had a very difficult education system like mine, you may think that you may not be able to compete. But I think you have to back yourself and say, I might not have had the best education system, but I'm going to keep on improving myself. And then over time, you go and study in the best universities in the world and you compete with other kids. And therefore, your background becomes less of an issue. The last thing I'll say is also this notion of partnering with those that have seen things ahead. There's a role for young people, yet there's a role for experienced people. That combination, I think, is always very, very successful when we're able to get young people to listen to some of the advices from the older generation, but also the older generation to be able to relate to some of the innovative ideas and crazy ideas sometimes from young people. But some of those crazy ideas can come with a lot of good results in the end.
That's interesting because I notice a lot of the elder generation of leaders who've been successful find that very difficult to do. They seem to have become over the years quite detached from the younger generation and either have an implied or even a very direct indifference to talking to younger people, and certainly don't come across as being particularly engaged with them or wanting to even listen to them. Do you think that's a fair assessment of the majority? And either way, what is it that people in the early set can start doing to try to go and break that trend?
Yes, I think it is a fair statement, and it's something I work a lot on to persuade people of my generation or people slightly younger than me to say, think of young people very differently. Don't think of them as a problem. Think of them as a solution. So what I try and do in my life is my first audience are my own kids. Am I able to lead them? Am I able to persuade them? Am I able to get them to see the world in the same way as my father did? Then broader than that, in my broader family, my Mali and Piti family, am I an influential uncle in there with young people in my family? Then in my community, am I that influential person? Then in broader society, am I that influential person? And then in my work environment, I work with incredibly smart, opinionated, passionate young people. I've got to find a way not to come to them as just the person who knows it all. How do I engage them? How do I hear their views? And so I think it is possible, because command and control cannot work. It doesn't work in our families. It doesn't work in the society. There has to be a lot of engagement. I think even in the academic sphere, gone are the days where the lecturer just stood in front of the class and said it all. By the time the lecturer speaks, the kids have looked at the thing on YouTube, TikTok, whatever. So it's an engaging way of conversation and learning.
Thanks for the question, Avita. We'll come back to that a little bit later. We'll slot it in when we talk more about financial inclusion in general. I just want to continue this kind of theme because, Lincoln, when I see you on stage and, listen or read what you write, I get the sense, and actually just talking to you now, I get the sense that you're a very different type of leader. You've got a very different approach to leadership, certainly to many of the leaders that I worked for. Can you give me a quick summary of the traditional leadership that you're trying to break the mold from? What do you classify as traditional leadership that we're still seeing largely utilized, and essentially by what you're doing, you're kind of making a statement that it's ineffective?
Yeah, I think the old notion of an omnipresent, know-it-all CEO who is at the apex of the organization, who makes all the decisions, shapes everything that happens in that organization or society or even a family, has been busted by COVID. COVID actually exposed that notion of a one-person hero type leader really doesn't work. Society works a lot through influence. Leadership is not a title held, it's an influence felt. How do you get to influence and yet have the humility to be influenced? So I think for me, a lot of what I try and do is to influence the people I work with, but yet be humble to be influenced by them. The third thing is respect. I think treating everybody with respect and dignity is so important. It's not what you say. People can feel if it's fake or if it's real. If respect is real, people's opinions matter, different ideas matter, different perspectives matter, different backgrounds, different cultures matter. If you create that environment, you can unleash so much of what's there. When I look at these 4 years of the turnaround of our business, it's not because of myself and Chris and a few leaders. It's hundreds of people who believed, hundreds of people who changed everything they knew to do things very differently, and who had to endure a lot of doubts, a lot of skepticism on the ground. But working with them, suddenly everybody's like, how did it happen? Those of us who were in the journey, we know how it happened because we're shaping it every day with the people that we work with. So I'll conclude by saying I have a particular passion for the front line because I believe that the front line is the bottom line. If you don't devolve as much power and authority and trust to the people who have to face the customer, you're making a big mistake. So in my world, I make very few decisions. Yes, those decisions are consequential, but if I'm making a lot of decisions, something is wrong. There should be more decisions being made throughout the organization. And when we gain success, you have to celebrate people, celebrate them publicly, celebrate them with joy because they've done it. If you are the kind of person where if things go wrong, you blame the people. When things go right and you take all the accolades, people are going to see through that. So it's very, very important to be the kind of leader that embraces the new. And the new is everybody's got a voice. You remember those days when we listened to newspaper, also the radio, TV, read newspapers. Today, everybody creates content every single day. So if you think of leading where you are know-it-all, then there's a problem. New ideas cannot come in your organization. Robust debate cannot happen in your organization. Difference of opinion cannot take place. And I think in the new world, I think you need leaders that are more in touch with their people and their customers.
A practical question, I suppose, or advice for people wanting to do this. Taking a more subservient role, not necessarily standing up in the limelight, influencing behind the scenes. Again, I think, this is something that somewhere on your career journey, maybe you'll tell us, you started to feel that it didn't only feel right, but it was giving you success doing it. Now, a lot of people I see trying to go and be influential and perhaps more of a statesman's like or a quiet management, they get left behind because they're not showcasing themselves properly. The work that they're doing is a little bit hidden. The senior leadership team aren't seeing it. And there are a set of arrogant people who are wanting to go and progress fast because they're selfish within their own personal careers. How do you break that mold? How, if you want to do things the right way and to influence behind the scenes, do you still get accredited for the work that you're doing and promoted and and told that you're doing a good job? I see so many people just get left behind in there because the organization doesn't see them.
Yeah, I'd like to nuance it differently, Colin. I would say you have the one extreme, which are the A-type personalities who show off. They want to lead. They want everybody to see, take all the glory, make all the decisions, show you that they went to Henley, they've got these qualifications. And I always say to a lot of young people going down that path, at some point it's going to catch up with you. That's not what I advocate for. That's not what I believe in. There's another extreme of people who want to always do things behind the scenes, don't want to step up when they need to step up, don't want to be controversial, and just say my work is going to, speak for itself. I think there's a path between these two extremes. And that path is genuine, authentic engagement. When your team needs to be in the lead, you are in support. When you have to be in the lead, the team is in support. And for those who are passionate about rugby, I'll give an example of Siya Kolisi. When Siya was picked, a huge part of the rugby population didn't believe in the guy. But Rassi saw something in him and said, you will be our captain. But in the field, Siya leads with other leaders. And at the beginning, people didn't understand. Although he showed them many times, he would be replaced sometimes at 60 minutes. But he did it for the team. In the end, he didn't want to be man of the match in a losing team. The team had to win first, then we collect the man of the match. So, but where Siya is strong, he will lead. Now, when it comes to the cameras, the other leaders were strong in the field. They're not comfortable to speak. Siya knows that he now has to speak for the whole nation. He has to speak for the whole team. Then you see a very different Siya. In the field, he's not as vocal. So you're able to play to your strengths. And so I also want to dismiss this notion that you have to go through a personality change to be a good leader. People can lead regardless of their personality. It doesn't mean introverts cannot lead, but those introverts must know the critical times where they have to show up, where they show up for their team, show up for the work their team is doing. You can't say everybody knows. No. At that time, you as a leader, you owe it to your team to go and present to the leadership and tell them what your team is doing. When you have to deal with a customer, you have to show up. So there are times where even the introverts have to know when to show up.
It has to come at some point, and it comes from anonymous. So let's talk Trump. And there's so many ways you could phrase the question. I mean, we can, what's your view on the Trump leadership? I guess my question around it is, how on earth does someone with that type of style get to be president? Because I reject those attributes as being anything that we would like to see happening in any of the organizations or political establishments that we're used to here in South Africa. But that's my view. What's your take on this Trump agenda?
My view, and I wrote something some other time about it, about there are pockets of people in societies who feel left out by the status quo. If you look at Brexit was a voice of people, whether you agree with it or not, who said, we don't agree with the status quo, regardless of the consequences. If you look at the Arab Spring was also a group of people saying, this is what we're saying. So in America as well, there were people who never thought that Donald Trump would become president. He's been elected twice as president. So I think that if we spend a lot of time analyzing the person, I think we're missing the point. We should be asking ourselves, what is it that the voters saw in him versus other alternatives? That's the way I always want to look at this. Secondly, I think it's also important as a leader of an organization like mine, not to allow personal views to be the views of an organization. Because an organization like mine is wide, it's got 3,500 people, they all have different views. So it's not important as whether I agree with President Trump's style or not. But for me, what's important is he and his voters have to deal with what it is that he's doing. And there are systems in America to either vote him out or say he's doing a good job or not a good job, and not for a business person in South Africa to comment on whether he does good things or not good things.
When you, one of the quotes that you had is that you think good leadership is knowing how to lead by being led. Could you explain what that means?
One of the biggest things is knowing that you can build a very strong team around you and making sure that at all layers of the organization, you are insisting on quality of very good and diverse people. that can be, attracted and retained in an organization. When those people do well, they are able to lead you. So you are leading, yet you are being led. Because leading is not one-dimensional. It's multifaceted. So in certain instances, you may be in the lead. In certain instances, you may be led. And I think for me, that's important. So throughout my career, I have worked with some of the most incredible people. I have learned so much from them about how to see the world. Let me give you one or two practical examples. One of the areas that I learned a lot on was on leading women. And I learned from the women that I worked with, because there is no manual in our companies for leading a woman who's going through a divorce. There is no manual for leading a woman who's got postnatal depression. There is no manual to lead a woman who's had a miscarriage, or lead a woman who is in an abusive relationship. I've had to learn from women in my family, my friends, my wife, and my colleagues about issues that I was blind to as a man. And that gave me insight. And there I was being led. And it made me a better person because I was learning from them. The second example was mental health. 15 years ago, I didn't know much about mental health. But a very good colleague of mine shared with me her story and her battle with mental health. And I started that journey then and learned so much about what mental health is. So the notion of diversity and inclusion is real. If you are leading and being led, it's about embracing diversity in its truest form, by knowing that there are people with different experiences, different cultures, different languages, different perspectives, different ways of viewing the world. That is so enriching, rather than a one-dimensional thing where you are Mr. Know-it-all or Mrs. Know-it-all.
When did you, or let's rephrase that, as you've been, progressing through the ranks, what was it that motivated you, whether that was in government, whether it was in Standard Bank, whether it was this now? And really what I'm interested there, was it, profit? Is it title? Or did you find that throughout your career, there's been something deeper that's got you out of bed every morning?
It's been about making a difference. I learned at the feet of some of the most amazing people. If I could challenge the audience to just reflect back in their lives to the most influential people in their lives that got them to where they are today. It might have been your priest, it might have been your teacher, school principal, sports coach, or whatever. All these people may not have risen up the economic ladder. But when you go back to where you come from and they see you, their face lights up, because their motivation was to produce people like you. So I wanted to be a leader like that. I wanted to produce other people, the same way as there were people like Craig Bond and others who took a bet on me. I wanted to take a bet on others. I wanted to make a difference in society. And so those are the things that have really driven me. I've been fascinated by the life of a corporate or the life of working in the private sector, where titles are important to people. And so people become confused when titles mean nothing to me, because I've never learned a life of titles. Hierarchy has never been an issue for me. Status, money, all of those things have never been an issue for me, because that's not how I've been brought up. So that fire in my belly has always been about making a difference, taking on the status quo, taking on difficult things. That's the thing that drives me. And the joy you get and the fulfillment is not external, it's internal. Nobody else can see it. You are accountable to yourself as to whether are you still on your true north. So that's what has always motivated me.
Think of all the things that you've said so far. This must place you. This is the one which the fewest percentage of people try to apply, especially in a corporate finance background. Maybe in some startups in different industries, there's some particularly purposeful people. Maybe I'm a bit jaded as an ex-banker, but I rarely come across people who've got that desire to deliver on purpose and who are so uninterested in hierarchy and status within those organizations. They're just focused on delivery. But you've gone through this journey and you've delivered. There's been results. You've got huge support from some very well-known senior leaders. Why is it so difficult for others to see that your approach is working and to try to catch on and apply the same in their own spheres?
I think there are three main things that a lot of people battle with. And I have a lot of conversations with the people I mentor, with young leaders, when I warn them about these things. The first one is status and ego. All right? People have to ask themselves, why do you want to lead? What's the real reason? Not what you tell people. If it's status, it's money, power, you're going to make power, status, and money type decisions. But if you're driven by something bigger, you will make the right kind of decisions. The second one is know thyself. It's written in the Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. So rather than trying to be something else, know your limitations, know where your strengths are, and play to your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. The third one is try and be your authentic self. People try and put on a corporate mask of what they think success would look like or success would be acceptable. So I've always backed the trend. I bring my full self to work. I am like this with my friends. I'm like this with my family. I'm like this with my colleagues. I don't want to be something different. And so when I'm on the ground with my team, we are here, we're driving long distances in different countries. We are in the north of Nigeria, going to different states. That's you. There's no title there. There's no desk saying CEO and whatever. So I think people are messed up by those things. And the last one is people become slaves to the REM. Remuneration is important. And remuneration for performance is important. I fully subscribe to it. But you can't be a slave to remuneration. People will say things to me to say, well, if it's not in my KRAs, I'm not going to do it. If it's not in the scorecard, I'm not going to do it. And I say, imagine if you were to run your home on the basis of a scorecard. How would that work for you, right? We know what's right and wrong. Of course, it's good to have some metrics of sorts, but you can't just be a slave of the metrics, because what you would do is that a customer would call and say, I didn't get the service. And your response would be, we're within SLA. Because you're using a metric that suits you rather than to solve the problem of what the customer is complaining about. Or a staff member will say, I don't like how you spoke to me. You are worried about what you intended. No, it's how it landed. So the reason why I've always wanted to speak and write as a practitioner is that holds you to a standard, because people can say, you're saying that, but at work, you're not doing it. So there's more pressure rather than writing books or saying things as a retired CEO, because now you're no longer active. So I've always wanted to challenge myself in the cauldron of the business to see whether I can stick to my values regardless.
So Sajid's question in a minute. You said a minute ago you kind of bring your whole self to work, but you don't bring everything, right? I mean, surely you don't bring all of your fears and your vulnerabilities to work as well. That might be authentic, but then who's going to want to follow a leader that is showing all of the things that they get wrong or occasionally breaking down?
Again, this is what people thought. And because I used to see that vulnerability in my father, I used to see that vulnerability with the people I saw when I grew up, I knew this was the right thing. I'll give you a couple of examples. Sometimes I would show people my scorecard, my KRAs, my scorecard, how I was rated. Because why should it be a secret? Because they've got scorecards, I've got a scorecard, I've got to show them the scorecard. My salary when I was at Standard Bank was hidden, but I would share it with my staff so that they know, because there's no secret, right? Now here where I am, it is public. So again, you're not defined by things. When things have happened to me and I'm emotional, I show my emotions. I'm not less of a person because I show my emotions. If somebody else thinks that I'm less of a leader, that's okay. But I'm not going to change who I am in order to tick somebody else's box. I have to tick my moral compass. I have to tick my own authenticity and my own value system. And my own value system says, I am who I am. So when I've made a mistake, I talk about that mistake. I even in my book talk about some of the biggest blunders I've done in my career, because they are normal, ordinary things. Because why should somebody reading it who worked with me say, I remember he did that big mess and he's never spoken about it? I should share those things. So I think there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable. I think that the future demands us to be vulnerable and be authentic.
So Sajid's question, the type of leadership that you're explaining, this idea of Ubuntu, this very group-led leadership, appreciating that you're part of a larger force and that your success is in a large part due to the village that you're living within. It's clearly working for you. Why is it so difficult for leaders to drop their egos, embrace humility, and show their vulnerability to actually drive significant change and transformation and benefits for their organizations? I'm curious about this. Do you think it comes down to backgrounds and traditions that were brought up from the different spaces? Is it the way that we're taught by business schools and schools? Is it the lack of mentors? I mean, it seems to be working for you. I love it. I'd love to see more of it, but it feels like it's an uphill battle.
It's a combination, because I still think people don't think it's going to work. And what we've tried to do, those of us who believe in those things, is to show people it's going to work, and be vulnerable, and be, praising your people. I'll give you a small example. One time, Mteto Nyati, who's the chairman of ESCOM, put out on LinkedIn at the darkest of times at ESCOM, put in something there where he lauded his team for meeting some metrics as they were trying to improve the issue on load shedding. And people attacked him. How dare he does that? It's all dark. Because I was involved in a turnaround, it was also dark here. I reached out to him and said, I think you're doing a good job, because your people who have to make this turnaround have to know that there's been progress, right? And then he then again wrote and said to the guys, well done. Then I said to him, I'm putting up my hand to come and speak to your team. And he invited me in his team. Begin Numalo runs Generation, got me to speak to his team. And it was an emotional 90 minutes. And those same people, when they were able to get load shedding to where it is today, I got the honor of being invited back in there. Other people were shunning those people, but Mteto Nyati wasn't shunning those people. He was saying, I'm the chairman of ESCOM. So if your people can't see that you are in it with them, why should they care? If you can't celebrate with them, why should they care? If you're only the one getting all the products and the benefits, why should they care? So I just think that this notion of doing everything by yourself, achieving everything by yourself, is the way sometimes the history books are written. Sometimes corporate things are written. When the results are announced, it's my face there, it's me giving interviews. But if I get in my head that I did the work, I'm not leading. I'm just taking a stroll all by myself.
I get the feeling just from talking to you now that you talk to a hell of a lot of people and ask for support and questions, and you just have a huge network. In fact, just talking to you before we started this call, your recollection of names, some of the names that you've mentioned on this call is, for me, it's absolutely staggering, your memory in terms of the people that have benefited you on life. So would you say that this is indicative that you've got very much that walking the floor style of management? It's obviously been successful for you. It's similar to, I guess, was it the CEO of Walmart who uses this type of approach and is well written about at business schools?
Yeah, there are two people that kind of taught me this, but not directly. But I used to admire the way they were doing it. The first one was my dad in my community. My dad kind of knew everybody, would introduce you to everybody. And so I thought this idea of knowing and remembering people was important. Then, when I was a young activist, we were being told stories about Robben Island and how Madiba, who was the Madiba before we all got to know Madiba, who always made every prisoner feel important, that he would share his pictures that he would get with them, share some of his letters with them, and all of those things. And he would remember people's names, and he would actually write letters to a lot of people. That said to me, this thing of making every person feel they are important and they are real was genuine, and I liked it. And so what I did was to always test myself. How many people can I remember? How many conversations could I remember? And so as I worked in businesses, if I traveled to a country or a province or a business unit, I was testing myself. Could I remember the names? Could I remember the conversations we had? And it became a skill. And it's a skill that I treasure the most. If I don't remember somebody's name or a conversation, I really, really beat myself up because I know the value of remembering somebody or remembering a conversation. And I know how I feel when I see somebody I know and who doesn't remember me. So I don't want any of the people I work with or people I know not to be in the same position. So people will say it's hard, but think of the guys in the front line. You want them to know all of your products. You want them to know all your processes. You want them to know all your rules. Well, the least you can do as a leader is also know them as much as you can.
What's your, and I want to segue into Vita's question now, what's your view of shared values? Shared values, obviously, this was popular a few years ago as people talked about, you could have the three Ps, I suppose, organizations that are meant to do more than just chase profit. There was a rejection of the BlackRock original model that it should all be just chasing shareholder value. And I think Larry, Larry Fines, he comes out and he says, no, we've got to support organizations that are pushing for diversity and equity and inclusion, and we want to see them doing good for society and being considerate of the externalities. This became a very big thing, and now we seem to be in a reversal. What's your take on shared values? Is this where we should still be focusing organizations' attentions?
I think sometimes people make these things as fads. It's a new fad and a new, fashionable thing to chase after. I know Professors Porter and Kramer wrote a lot about shared value and all of that. My fundamental belief is that any company that succeeds in a society that's failing, that company is going to fail. Any company that succeeds when its people internally are failing, that company is going to fail. Any company that does well, but its customers are not doing well, is going to fail. So, and a company that think it does well, but shareholders are not doing well, is not going to have a great future. So for me, these things are not theoretical. I think that they are real. And so if you're sitting as a CEO, as a leader, you have to take these stakeholders into account in your decision making. You have to take them into account on your journey, and you have to take them with you. Whether it ticks some scorecard on ESG or shared value and whatever might be coincidental. I don't start from there. I start by just saying, there can't be a company without its staff. There can't be a company without its shareholders or its customers or society. So therefore, a company has to be an integral part of society, and its success must contribute to society's success. So some of the people that are going backwards on some of these things didn't really believe in those things. It was a fad. And when the winds of change come, suddenly people will ditch, some of those things. So for me, I fundamentally believe in what Lesaka has to do for society, and how Lesaka as a community has to be contributing to a broader community in Southern Africa. That's my fundamental belief.
3 questions to try to get through, and just a few more minutes to do this. Let's start with the first one. A lot of what you've said, I'm guessing, is one of the reasons that you decided to actually join Lesaka, because this idea of getting onto the coalface and enhancing financial inclusion, is that firstly accurate? That was one of the reasons that you went into Lesaka. And then to Avita's question, what exactly are you doing at Lesaka to try and improve, inclusion in financial markets?
Okay. In the short time I have, I'll just say it's possible to do this being engaged with your staff, with your customers in any company. When I did it in a large organization, it's not as if everybody was doing it. I did it because I believed in it, and it started working, and then it started to build a crescendo. I'll just give you 2 examples of the work that we do on financial inclusion. One is with social grant beneficiaries who have never been banked, have never been given access to broad financial services. Now they are able to access lending, they're able to access insurance, they're able to access transactional account and other value-added services. And we've been able to show that you can do that profitably and responsibly and sustainably. Another example is spaza shops and taverns in townships and villages that have not been seen as clients. We now have them as clients. We've got 90,000 of these micro merchants, and we give payment services to them in the market that others would not have seen as being profitable, or people would have seen as high risk.
Right, now 2 more questions to get through. We might go slightly over the 155, which we put it down on. The carrot for people that hang on after the 155 is I can announce who our next guest is going to be at the end of May. And I tell you what, I said at the start that I was very excited about interviewing Lincoln. I'm going to be just as, if not more, and he'll understand why when I get there, about who we'll be interviewing at the end of next month. But anyway, let's just get into it. So Shakani's asked, why does it seem very difficult for leaders to be ethical? I'd like to add on to that. How do you go and manage to be statesmanlike with, because I know that you've worked with people that aren't ethical. You've written about it in the book. You've talked about some of the difficulties, particularly when you were working in government and in the Ministry of Education there, and you started to, I think that was one of the reasons you stayed, that you wanted to move out and get into the corporate world. How do you pull yourself above it and not get dragged into it as well? But anyway, Shakani's first question is, why is it difficult for leaders to be ethical?
I think it's difficult because of the allure of power, status, the perks of leadership, and people being in a bubble of incumbency. And people think that therefore, because they're in these roles, they must get all of these perks. The other thing that makes it difficult is that the people that they surround themselves with cannot call them to account. I have a council of advisors in my life. The unelected leader of that council of advisors is my wife, that I've been with over the last 28 years. She gives solicited and unsolicited advice about what to do. It helps to ground you when you have people that can call you out, when they know suddenly you are coming with something that they know you have not worked for. So I think that's important for us to remain grounded and ethical and call people out. If there are friends that do wrong, you call them out. And so that's what I've tried to do with my friends, with my colleagues. And yeah, some people might shun you. You might not get certain positions, but your internal scorecard, as long as that's okay, you're all right.
Lincoln, to draw this to a close, can you just tell us quickly the name of the book, where people can get it from if they've not read it? I found it inspirational.
Yeah.
And then the name of the foundation and how people can connect with you if they'd like to learn more about the work that you are doing for young leaders.
Yeah, the name of the book is Blazing a Trail, Lessons for African Leaders. You can get it on exclusive books or any of the, the online areas like Take a Lot. And then all the proceeds from the sale go to the Lincoln Marley Leadership Foundation, whose core aim is to invest in young people as has been invested unto me by those earlier. And one of those flagship programs is the Youth Summit that I do with the Henley Business School. It's going in its third year now for young leaders and entrepreneurs between ages of 21 and 35.
Is absolutely fantastic. I want to thank you very much for joining us. Obviously, I want to thank Henley for sponsoring this event and John for opening this particular session. Next month, I've just got to get the dates tied down, so stay tuned on my mailer or message me or follow me on social media. But who have we got coming up as our next guest? It's Semteto Niate. So obviously a dear friend of yourself, Lincoln. That's why I think I can safely say I'm really looking forward to that interview. And I've interviewed him before as well, and his views on leadership were inspiring, like yours have been. So I just want to say thank you very much. John, thank you very much for making these events possible. And to everyone that's dialed in, please, we hope to see you again. Have a great afternoon, have a great week. Cheers, bye-bye.